Hello everybody, welcome back to wolfeei. Today I'm going to try to show you in as much detail as I can provide the team making process of blockwars. There are some questions around on the Reddit about the process, and I'm going to answer it as well as I can. If you can't tell, I am sick. I can't talk super loud because my throat hurts. Anyways, let's get started. First off, blockwars, if you don't know, Minecraft event. That's all you got to know. Let's begin with the start of the process. Signups. This is what the message usually roughly looks like. Doesn't look the exact same every single time, but this is roughly what it looks like. A little text, a little date, the form, which I've obviously blocked off because you're not supposed to know what the form is because I don't want you guys to sign up for blockwars. Thank you. And then a little bit of extra info, usually at the bottom. I cut it off here because you don't need to know everything I provided. But a little line here saying like, oh, this is Blockwars 13, saying we have our dates planned, blah, 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 whatever, right? Just some silly stuff. It doesn't necessarily matter. That's why I put this little line divider here, because the important stuff's at the top and then extra details are at the bottom for anyone who's interested. Anyways, next up, oh, actually, I guess this works pretty well. I didn't actually intend to show this first. I'll do that later. We'll start here. This is what the sign-up form looks like. I took screenshots of my sign-up for this event. I don't care about showing what I sign up with because I don't really pay too much attention to this, event sign-up form because I make the teams myself. I know what I want. So these are the questions. First, the date. Are you available? You can be like 100% sure, probably, maybe. This is not really super relevant. The only thing that really matters is if it's a might. But I haven't really paid attention to this question too much. It's just kind of a thing where it's nice to know if someone is 100% available, probably available, because it may factor in terms of making a decision on who gets to play, especially if we know why somebody may not be available, you know? Next up, do you play to win or have fun? I put play to have fun because I kind of knew what was going to happen for this event in terms of my team. I was probably going to end up having a bit of a stronger team, and I didn't really care. I usually play to win and to also have fun. Obviously, I'm not going to throw the entire time, but ultimately, the only thing I care about is having a good time, so that's the main thing I focus on. And then next up is, are you okay with teaming with streamers you don't know? If yes, how many? This is a very, very important part of the sign-up process because it lets us know how experimental we can be with certain players. I myself usually know most of the people in the event, so this question for streamers I don't know is almost impossible to actually make happen, but it technically could happen. There's a combination out there probably where I don't know any of the people on the team. That's balanced, but usually this doesn't happen. I don't really care about who I'm with as long as it's a team where it's fun. I don't know. That's all I really care about. So this is the first little bit. Second bit is the following questions. Are you family friendly? No swearing or adult humor. This is good to know in terms of, you know, who can and can't be on the same team. If somebody is exclusively family friendly and someone is exclusively not family friendly, they shouldn't be on the same team. Has it happened in the past? Yes. But they shouldn't be on the same team if possible. So that's good info to have. Then what platform will you be live streaming on? This is good to know for the website, so we know whose link to use for their stream. Of course, also streaming is expected for the event. It is pretty much required. There are exceptions. For example, Lizzie said that she 100% doesn't stream any at all. But we are aware that Lizzie's inclusion brings viewership to the event, so it's fine, right? That's okay. I understand. That's fine. But obviously that doesn't apply to everybody. Any situation where not streaming is something a player wants to do or you know, they can't stream, whatever, it always needs to be talked about in advance. For example, with Lizzie playing, we had talks between me and Jack being like, hey, Lizzie wants to play but doesn't want to stream. Is that okay? And then I had to approve, of course, right? Anyways, next up, now if you'd like, you can ask for a couple people to be teamed with. Notes, you're not guaranteed to be teamed with your requested teammates. Feel free to put your team request in order of how much you'd like to team with them. This one is always good to know because it kind of shows us, like, you know who wants to team with who. Obviously, team making wise, I kind of know what works and what doesn't work, but I don't know what people want. I can only assume what people may want. So this is very helpful in terms of, a hint as to what people are hoping for their teams. Next up, are there any players you don't want to be teamed with? Feel free to look at the player Discord server to see the full roster of players. Obviously, I don't know everybody's, personal connections with each other. Maybe there are people who don't like each other privately, but not publicly. I can confirm that is the case. I'm not going to reveal who, of course. So it's good for me to know who can't be teamed with each other. Because I've done it in the past on accident. Somebody didn't put it on the forum, and then I just teamed people with each other, and then I got a DM being like, so, about this little team up that we did here, I don't want to play on this team anymore because I don't like this person. And I'm like, oh, my bad. No, well, not my bad, because you should have told me, but I'll fix it. And then we fix it every single time, pretty much. Anyways, last part of the forum. You can request your team color if you want. And then also, Lunar Client mentioned, because the event is optimized to run well with Lunar Client. We did this because it's a very convenient way for people to have a better performing version of Minecraft to play the event. I think it's always good to have. And then, all this stuff, whatever. It explains what Lunar Client is for, the variety people, and maybe some of the people who don't know what Lunar Client is. It tells you how to install it, etc., etc. Any questions or concerns, people can also answer if they want. And that's it for the sign-up form. That's what it looks like. No other questions. That's the entire sign-up form. So you have exclusive insider info. That's the entire sign-up form. Every single question that's on it, pretty much every single time. Sometimes we'll include a bonus question if it's relevant at all. For example, if there's a sponsor, we may add a disclaimer where people will have to acknowledge, hey, there's a sponsor, you are not required to promote it, but please be respectful, of course, of the thing. But that hasn't happened since Blockwars Chaos, so it's fine. Anyways, then we get to this. You may be familiar with this team image because we post this on Twitter the day before or the day of the event, depending on time availability of our staff and who forgets and who doesn't forget to do it. I actually post this image on team announcements, for the players. So this, you can tell here, the name of this is Discord Teams Template, because I actually make this for the team announcements to show to the players in a very convenient image. Because something that I noticed that was a bit iffy was that in Discord, usually if we have team announcements, you'll have a long list, a massive message with just so many different lines of text, just having one name on it, where I'm like, this can be optimized. So I optimized it, and it's got multiple uses because it also gets to be a team recap image for Twitter. So it's very convenient, and I like it. It looks good. It looks nice. So this gets posted to the players every single time. This is the one for this event as of right now. Obviously, there's a potential chance that somebody will not be able to play anymore. We'll see, I guess. But for now, this is the team announcements, or the team recap image for Blockwars 13. So, very nice. Anyways, this is all regarding signups and team reveals. Now the team making process and everything around that becomes relevant because somebody made a post. Very much appreciative that people put the effort into this post, by the way. I just want to give some perspective. Somebody made a post with the Blockwars 13 team averages showcasing the quote-unquote balancing. And what you'll notice in this image is that my team looks like it is by far the strongest out of all of these teams. However, that's my doorbell. However, I'll explain why that is not the case. Not to necessarily be like a defense of my team, but I think this will help give some insight and perspective on how team making and team balancing works and why it is not as cookie cutter as it may seem. So this post was made, and then one of the first and like highly upvoted things in the comments is, Pink seems broken, this justifies it unless wolfeei just doesn't play serious at all. This team is so strong, we're plays fine with a top frag, and the team is balanced, we find it like any other top frag. That is true, but I'll explain why Feinwerk is kind of necessary to make the team actually balanced. Because, I'll tell you right now, Feinberg wasn't supposed to be on my team the entire time. He was on a different team initially, and I had a different top frag. However, one thing I sometimes do is when I'm not confident about the balancing of an event, I'll personally do rough predictions, usually individual predictions, of where I think people will place. And with that, when I had a different top frag, the certainty of my team's performance was not very, very high, because one thing you'll have to factor in is this event's balancing. I'll actually grab this image to showcase it. It's very top and bottom heavy. The middle area has a pretty wide range, I will say. For example, what I mean with it's very top and bottom heavy, you have Shane and Harvey as a duo. Those are two people that will guarantee, well, Shane is guaranteed top 5 pretty much. Harvey is guaranteed top 15, I would say, or at least very likely, and potentially top 10. K-Man, top 5. Jojo, Misty, both top 10 candidates. Joel, top 15 candidate. Red and Shadoon, both top 10 candidates. Curry probably not anymore top 10 candidate, but Parker is. Booster's a top 10 candidate. And then Fur, May, and Zam are all like roughly, like they could get like anywhere really, but they're like top half. And in Sam's case, top 15 candidate. Shatter, top 10 candidate. Jumper, honestly, top 15 candidate. And then me, top 10 candidate. And then Fine would be like a top 2 pretty much in this event, right? Top 2 guaranteed pretty much. He's fighting for first with Shane and Cam, realistically speaking. So, anyways, what happened, because, again, these teams were not the way that they were the entire time. I will say at some point Purple was supposed to be in the roster as well, which then further solidifies the top and bottom heavy roster, because I should also clarify on the bottom end, you'll have people that are likely to place bottom 10, and you'll have like Jess, Jimmy, D-Tune, Rev, possibly Quite, Toma, you'll have Tobbs, possibly Handsome, possibly Caboodle, Doki, Giga. I didn't keep count, but I'm fairly sure that is at least close to 10, if not 10 people. That's the bottom 10 pretty much guaranteed, or at least very likely bottom 10, and the top 10 pretty much guaranteed, or at least very likely top 10. That means between, well, realistically speaking, between like 16th probably and like 29th-ish is very wide range. Your range is what, like, let me see, who even would be the range? Like maybe like a CPK to like an Anthos or something like that. I'm not sure. Or like a Gumi or like BTMC and Schrodinger. I'm not sure. There's a lot of range. Mog Swamp is in there too. I don't know. There's a lot of range that we're working with here. So I don't even know what the point that I was supposed to make. Oh yeah, my team. With having two people that are likely bottom 10, plus Gumi, who is uncertain because she's only played rookies, plus me, because I haven't been doing super hot recently, and with this roster being top and bottom heavy, the top end is likely going to be highly contested, which means I'm not likely necessarily to get top 10. I could, but it's not guaranteed. I need a very good top frag to be able to make my team viable. Unless Gumi is the absolute goat and gets like top 15, yeah, my team will be insanely broken, of course, right? But we don't know if that's the case. There's absolutely zero guarantee that will happen, and that's why Feinberg difference is important, I think, for my team, because like I am not a bad leader in the event, but because I don't really care anymore, I haven't like paid attention to like optimal strats, optimal whatever. I just kind of go with the flow. Yeah, my team could have probably been fine, I guess, in terms of balancing if it had another top frag. I don't think it would have been a win contender necessarily, especially if you compare it to a team like Yellow, which I think is comparable in terms of team structure. You need to factor in that right now, assuming D-Tune, Rev, and then Doki, Giga is relatively similar, which I do think is the case. Relatively similar, right, in terms of balancing. You make those equal. Misty, Joel, Jojo would have to be the same strength as me, Feinberg, and Gumi. I'm not sure if that's the case. It could be, but realistically speaking, Fine is better than Misty as the top frag. myself and JoJo could be close because JoJo's been doing a little bit better recently, and I don't think this score fairly represents JoJo's ability to perform. And then Joel has a bit more experience now and kind of knows what's up. Gumi hasn't played since February, so I don't really know how that compares. You're going to notice how, and that's just one example. There are comparable teams as long as you look at it, somewhat fairly, in my opinion. Anyways, this post inspired me to explain how things work because, as mentioned, people in the comments mentioned, I made a post in response, just obviously saying like, hey, thanks for this post. I just want to clarify things. This is how things work. First thing that I think should be mentioned is that obviously balancing here, if this was what my balancing sheet looked like, my team wouldn't exist. I don't want to give myself a guaranteed winning team. I, for the first time, have given myself a strong team, potentially. It's a team that, on the balancing sheet, has one of the stats being the best out of all the teams. You'll see in a little bit. But I don't want to give myself a team that's, blatantly broken, obviously, right? So let's explain. Blockwars scoring has changed drastically throughout the many events we've hosted, so it's not a reliable metric to use for team balancing. I still use it, but I also look at average placement and ranking. I'll show this in a little bit. Ranking being basically a tier list. The system isn't perfect, but alongside critical thinking, it usually results in a decently balanced roster, which I think does apply for the majority of teams in recent events. I think Blockwars 11 had pretty good balancing, except for the number 1 place team, I think. I don't remember if the second place team was broken too. That was just a Feinberg team, so of course it was. And then Blockwars 12 had pretty good balancing, except for, I think, the lower end teams. The bottom 2 teams were pretty weak, and I think that does affect the overall event scores as well, a good amount. For the rest, it was pretty close. So that, I think, showcases that the system I use has at least some consistency to it, because if we just use scores, it would look very different. Then yeah, so I use my own stat sheet that tracks stats. I'll explain this in a little bit too. One thing that is important to note that this doesn't factor in is that because scoring has changed so much, one of the main things that changed in scoring is from Blockwars, technically Rookies 1 to Blockwars 8, there was roughly a 15% increase to all statistics because we wanted a bit more wiggle room to work with for game score balancing, which has gotten a lot better. Previously, it wasn't that great. We wanted to give ourselves a bit more wiggle room, which meant that every pass scored needed to be multiplied. I can guarantee you that this does not factor that in, which immediately showcases a problem, because a lot of the people on the other teams are people who have played in the past. Obviously, there are teams that don't have that factor or have only a small margin of that. For example, a yellow team is a good example where Rev, Joel, and D-Tune have only played post Blockwars 8, Blockwars 9, and both Rev and D-Tune debuted in Rookies 2, so that they're completely void of that quote-unquote problem. But Misty and JoJo, their scores do not reflect the increase in points, and so do a lot of these scores. For example, Cubfan is a very good example of why this score change and other factors are very important to factor in, because right now on this sheet, you tell me that Cubfan is worse than Giga, which Giga is great. Giga is awesome person in Blockwars, but Cubfan has a lot more Minecraft experience, and Cub only played Blockwars 4 and Blockwars 6. That was a long time ago. A lot of things have changed since then. I would be shocked if Cubfan does worse than Giga in Blockwars, because Cubfan, like mentioned, is just so much more experienced at Minecraft. Do I think Cubfan's going to do like 2,000 points? No, but I think like 1,600 is probably a bit more fair, in which the most comparable player in this roster would be Anthos, I guess. Even then, again, using these stats, you see another issue. Anthos currently has a lower point average than Quite. I don't think that very correctly reflects their ability to perform. So that's why I use a custom sheet that showcases, different or highlights different performances, ignores like standout weak or standout insanely strong performances. Well, not standout insanely. It doesn't ignore standout strong performances, just adjusts them or like factors them in to an extent where it's fair. Whatever, right? Anyways, so that's the things that I think should be mentioned regarding points, because points are flawed. Then we get into the average points, which I can actually show my sheet for. This is the wrong tab. This one. So, this is the actual balancing sheet, or at least a copy of it, where I've just blocked off a lot of the individual points of the players. This is what the balancing for this event looks like according to my sheet. You might see a lot of numbers and be confused. That's totally fine. I'll explain this in a little bit, or at least alongside this. Also, this I didn't mention. I'll talk about this in a little bit. So, average points, you'll see this. The range is less than 1,000 from first to second, or first to 8th, sorry. But if you ignore the Feinberg difference, because Fein stats, if you look at this sheet, are very high, then you would notice that score-wise, the range is about 500, which is pretty good. Green is an outlier because green is a low-end outlier because Anthos is a very unpredictable player, you could say, and pink is an outlier because Feinberg is also an outlier, and also Gumi, honestly, in terms of rookies points, is hard to work with in terms of adjusting the scores, because Gumi outplaced me in rookies. Maybe Gumi outplaces me in Blockwars 13, but I feel like it's reasonable to assume that that probably won't happen, and for Gumi's balancing to be above me in regular teams is probably unfair, so adjusting her stats is very weird, because I try to adjust everybody's stats for rookies equally, or at least it'll like slope down. Higher end performances will be nerfed a bit stronger, because depending on who it is, because obviously if like I guess Gumi's a good example, or Anthos. I think Anthos got like 12th in rookies with like I don't know how many points. That's not going to happen in a normal event unless his team is broken. So it gets a bit more nerfed in terms of average points, whereas like someone placing like 30th in rookies won't be nerfed as much, because it doesn't really differentiate much from what they would actually do in a normal event. Obviously they would get like probably bottom 5 instead of bottom 10, but that's not that big of a difference. So anyways, I explained here, pink tap's mostly caused by Feinberg's average, and then he's in first with nearly 400 points, right above Shane with 3.1k average. Purple has 3.2k, but isn't playing. That is shown here as well. I showcased some stats here. Fine in terms of points and in terms of average placement, is just in first by a lot. Statistically, Purple's in second, Shane's in third, and Cam's in fourth according to points. Average placement wise, you've got Purple, Cam tied, and then Shane. This also showcases how, some scores were iffy in the past, because Shane clearly probably got hella points out of some games in the past where you would get more points but less placement or something. I don't know. So that's important to note. And then also, I explain why some of the weaker teams are the way they are, because it's also relevant for average placement. But pink being so far above is just because Feinberg and also Gumi, again, as mentioned, is a little tricky in terms of really guessing how well Gumi will do, because Gumi has only played rookies and did really good in rookies. So we'll see. Next up for points is, like mentioned, the bottom 3 teams. Red team is one of the lower end teams because B Team C and Schroeder and Lee are 2 people where they are not very predictable in terms of how they will perform. B Team C debuted on a very weak team, and I do think B Team C has it in him to do a lot better. I don't want to assume that he'll be like, top half immediately, but I do assume that he'll do a little bit better. So his stats will look weak, which is why his team will look slightly weak, but it'll adjust. And then Lee was predicted as like a meh-ish tier newcomer. You'll see this here as well. If I go to teams, we have this ranking on the right. Lee was predicted as a 6, as you can see, which was like low mid, because Lee actually has a good amount of Minecraft experience, and combined with BTMC's iffy stats, that probably is roughly fair to assume. Whether Lee will get BTMC's past performance and BTMC will get Lee's predicted performance or higher, whatever, right? It'll balance out in some way, shape, or form. So that's how red team works. Blue team next. Looks weak in terms of average points, but you'll notice in average placements they are in first. I'll explain how that works. They are a team without an S tier. What happens with S tiers in blockwars, and I think this data sheet here will showcase it pretty well, is they usually get a marginally higher amount of points, like in terms of average placement to average points ratio, because they're kind of carrying a team, right? They're gaining the most points for their team to be able to perform well, which is why usually what you'll see with S2 performances, and I think Feinberg is a prime example of that, is that as much as their average placement won't be that much higher than other players, their average points will be a lot higher, because they just get more points, which is why, again, points are not the best metric to work with, because it doesn't reflect the full capability of everybody. Is it perfect? No, but it doesn't reflect the full capability of everybody. Blue team is a prime example of how that reflects, because blue team would currently look slightly weak if you just use points. But the issue with that is, if I were to make it fair with just using points, blue team would be the most broken team in this roster by far. Because the thing is, they have 4 people with a wide range of performances, more than 10 placement difference between best and worst performance, and all of them have proven to be able to get at least close to top 15 or something along those lines. And they totally could do it. They have the best well-rounded team this event. 4 people who are likely top half. That's a lot of points, by the way. 4 likely top half players, and then Tobbs, who's new, who probably will get bottom 5. But 4 people who are likely top half, including Boostfer, who, as much as he's a fraud on my teams, is pretty good at the game. He can get top 10. Zam, who recently has shown that he is able to get top 10. And then Fur, who's very consistently like 15 to 20 range, I'd say, usually, as long as his team is balanced. And then May, who's only played twice thus far, but had a really good performance on a debut very strong team, and then an okay performance on a very weak team, which means on a decent team, May will probably just get top half, maybe even 15th, because May's also been practicing, which I think, should explain why blue team is pretty good. I mean, is it a team that is like super likely to win? Not necessarily, but it totally could, because again, it's very well rounded, which could come into play very well for something like team games, or extraction is very good, because they'll have multiple people who are at least decent at shooting, and I think it's relatively unlikely for one person to fully carry an extraction round unless they are the absolute GOAT, in which May is a past CSGO global elite. She's the absolute GOAT at extraction. I think they'll be alright. And then green one, I must say, is probably slightly weak, but it technically doesn't have to be. Main reason is Anthos. He is single-handedly the most unpredictable player currently active in the roster, as his recent placements have ranged from top 15 to bottom 5 on weak teams. Bottom 5 only on weak teams, top 15 obviously on a strong team, and also in rookies. Considering he has 2 strong top 5 again, but with a weaker from average, he may be able to have a solid performance, but is ultimately unpredictable. That is still true. Obviously, as you can see on this sheet, in terms of average points and average place, green team is the weakest, but that's because I haven't fully adjusted Anthos' stats to his possible performance, because I think that's not entirely fair. He could do insane. I have no clue. The thing is, it's either I give Anthos a balanced team on paper and it's broken, or I give Anthos a balanced team on paper and it's weak, or I give Anthos a weak team and it's weak, or a weak team and it's strong, or a strong team and it's weak, or I don't know. There is absolutely zero certainty with Anthos, and that's why his team is the way it is for this event, because I don't really know what else I could do with it. This is the best we can do, really, in terms of this event specifically, because again, I'll explain this later once we get to the additional reasoning. Some things with team making isn't just numbers. There's other factors that come into play as well. Anyways, average placement. I honestly think this is something I look at the most for team making and team balancing. Average placement is this middle row, because I think it's the most reliable metric in terms of actual stats to use for balancing. Because regardless of point changes, regardless of whatever, right, average placements will roughly remain consistent throughout events. The only issue is weak performance or slightly weak teams or slightly strong teams. You can't really easily differentiate between that, and that's why I think average scores can sometimes be slightly flawed, because if somebody just gets only strong teams, they might get an absolute stinker team the next time they play, or if someone gets only weak teams, they might get an insanely broken team once they play. Or specifically, the main thing that I think is a very good example of why things can be broken is if someone's played once and they had a really strong or really weak team, their next team may be insanely OP or insanely weak. For example, blockwars 11 had a really strong team, and then blockwars 12 ended up being a weak team. BTMC could now have an insanely weak team and an insanely strong team. We don't know. It is very hard to predict. It's very hard to reflect properly in stats, and that's one where average placement can be flawed, but I think it's still slightly better than average points, especially if we only use average points. But teach their own, I guess. Depends on how the event is ran and how things are kept balanced, etc., etc., etc. Anyways, you'll notice that some of the teams rank very differently in average placement compared to average points, most notably Blue, who rank first as opposed to 7th. That is true. Here they rank 7th, not that far behind the rest. It's only like a slight margin. Here they rank first, not that crazy far above the rest, but you'll notice that the top 3 in average placement are a decent bit ahead of the rest, and then you'll notice that the rest is just like roughly 2 apart from everyone, so pretty close. You'll notice here, or something that I think is important to note, is a Blue team being so high is, again, because they are an average out team. They're a team with 4 people who are pretty decent or pretty good, instead of having an S tier and then whatever, normal quote-unquote balancing. They have just a well-rounded team. And that reflects in average placement, because these are all people who can get top half. And getting top half is usually pretty good, and it could be pretty good for event performance. And I think that's, Blue team is a prime example of how that works. Orange team should also be noted because it's a Cam-End team. And one thing you'll notice, Cam-End team and Cam-End team being top 2 wasn't intentional. But I'll explain why it is the way it is, and especially in the additional reasoning, it'll factor in. The thing with Cam-End's team in terms of average placement is mainly due to Moxswamp, because Moxswamp has only played once, which was on a team that I think did mostly really good. They just didn't do too hot in the final game, but it does mean that Moxswamp's stats are, I think, an average of like 27th, which I don't know if Moxswamp is an average place of 27th. As far as I can remember, in MCC, Moxswamp's placement wasn't 27th, and people typically, I guess honestly, Blockwars is probably easier than MCC nowadays, but still, a strong team. I still think that, it should be weighed out a little bit. Maybe Moxswamp doesn't get 27th again. Maybe they do. I don't know. They're on a team with Cam-End, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to do insane, because Cam's just had good teams. We'll see, I guess. But the main reason why Orange team is that high up is for other reasons. And then Red and Green being lower is for the same reason as mentioned above. It's just because of uncertainty of how people will perform, and I don't want to accidentally make one team, or at least I don't want to make one team super broken that I can prevent. Because that's something where I could have obviously done something, made a stronger team if we really wanted to, but it could have been broken, and that would have been completely my fault. Some other teams just end up being broken because the things that I am given in terms of signups, in terms of whatever else, means that I don't really have many options, and it'll look good on paper, but it'll just end up being strong when it comes to the actual event. So here comes additional reasoning. I know looking at stats or trying to make statistically balanced teams can be fun and could result in the most fair event possible, but it's not a realistic approach for actual team making. Ultimately, most blockers are fun and put on a show for both streamers and viewers, and this is important. What stats doesn't factor in is the following: people's comfortability to team with people they don't know. Some people are cool with 4 people they don't know, others are only cool with 1 or none. I already showed you the sign up form. I think it's like here or here. This one, the question at the bottom, very important. Next, team or duo requests. Some people want to team with specific people. I want to at least give a chance for these people to team with each other. I'll explain, because it applies to Orange Team. And then team cohesion, making sure a team makes sense. I don't want to just make a random team. I want to make sure a team makes sense, whether it's because they all know each other and they're friends, or because they all share the same type of energy or same type of vibe, like Blue Team, where it'll just work. As much as they don't all know each other, I think it'll just work because they have the same, amount of excitement and energy in their content and etc. And they'll probably just vibe well because of the way that, their personalities and the way that they behave. Orange is a perfect example of why this factor is so important. Cam and Ant have been wanting to do it for a while, but I continuously wasn't able to make it happen. This is true. I don't know how long it's been. I know at least since Blockwars 11, they've been asking every single time. Maybe before, I don't remember. But it's been a requested duo for a little bit. I finally was able to make it happen. So that's when the team started. Both Moxwamp and Jimmy expressed interest in playing again, but hadn't signed up. So I messaged some people after the event to check, hey, are you down to play again? How was your event experience? Just give me feedback on what can we do to make it like a better experience overall. Obviously, I'm not going to just fully listen to one person's feedback if it's drastically different. We're not going to just completely change the event based on one person's opinion or whatever. But I think that should be mentioned either way, that there are people who play but don't sign up because they want to be, because either they all forget or they only want to play with certain teams. So I'll have to let them know, hey, this is what we got for you, blah blah, whatever. Moxwamp and Jimmy are good examples. I don't think Moxwamp is familiar with the sign up process of events, so I just messaged Moxwamp being like, hey, you want to play? And then Jimmy, not same thing, but Jimmy more so is someone who probably doesn't pay attention to the Blockwars Discord super actively, so I just I messaged Jimmy being like, hey, I have this team, would you be interested in playing? And that's what I did. And in order for them to have a team where they'll be with people they know, or that will be cohesive, I wanted to add a fifth player that works with everybody pretty much, in which Callum CPK is a good fifth place player where, it's not broken, but it's at least somewhat close to balanced, which is where Orange Team came into play and was fully fleshed out. That's why Orange Team is the way Orange Team is. Camman and Venom duoed. Moxwamp and Jimmy, I messaged because I think, I want to include them in the event, and I think that team was the best for them to fit on with what I was working with at the time. Callum CPK signed up by himself, fit best to be on the team in order for Moxwamp and Jimmy to be likely interested in playing on the team. So that's how the team became its whole thing. This applies to most of the other teams as well. That is true. Not every team is obviously going to be fully people that are super picky, but there are people that only there are people who will only play under certain conditions. Usually those conditions aren't too strict. For example, Joe signs up saying he wants to know 2 people on his team. That's fine. That means half of his teammates can be people he knows and half of his teammates can be people he doesn't know, and we can expand the Joe Bart universe of potential teammates, because we've been doing that ever since he first played, and it's become a lot easier to work with, because in the beginning it was really difficult. Now it's a lot easier, and it creates interesting combinations, because you'll get something like this purple team, where obviously Joe and Handsome is a duo we've seen in the past a lot. Joe and Shatter ended up doing for this event, which I'll get into in the last tab. And then Jumper and Kaboodle are the 2 people that Joe doesn't know yet, but I think they make for an interesting combination, and I think it could result in a very fun team. I don't know. Anyways, so that's that. And then I think the team that has probably the most people that are open to teaming with people they don't know is Blue, which is why I get such a fun and interesting group of people in the same team, which I do stand by. I think Blue is a very fun and cool type of team to have in this event, but for the most part, these people don't know each other. There's a couple people that will know each other or are familiar with each other. Boostfer and Zam, maybe Fur and Zam, maybe Fur and Tobbs, for example, and May and Tobbs obviously know each other. But for the most part, a lot of these people are were not yet familiar with each other, at least before they got teamed. So that's that. And then conclusion, hopefully this gives you some insight on how team making works. Hopefully this video will help with additional information. I just noticed I've been yapping for about 40 minutes, but that's kind of how the team making process goes. This isn't a one hour process. This is a multiple small sessions process where I sit down, look at the signups and go, what can I do with this? Who could we bring in to make this roster more well-rounded. Maybe, you know, add some interesting players here and there to switch things up, etc. And yeah. Anyways, last tab. I think this is cool to showcase as well. Team making. We use a tier list. This is not the actual tier list. I just grabbed all the players that I have in my little Blockwars player folder, and I'll showcase how some people being included works, and I'll explain why. So this is part of the sign up and roster process of this event. I will not reveal everything. I think these are some things I can reveal that's not too big of a deal. First, people that are confirmed from DMs. Gumi and Doki. Doki was, Doki went on one block with Anthos, and they talked, and Doki was invited by Anthos, or asked at least if they wanted to play in Block Wars, to which they said yes, but only if, you know, I'm with some people I know, in which Gumi obviously comes into play perfectly, to make sure Doki has somebody that they know. So that's how that works. So they were both asked if they wanted to play. They didn't sign up. They were just asked if they were interested in playing, and that's why they're in the roster. Next up, so people who signed up, that should be in. Obviously, there's going to be people who will sign up and should be in. And especially this event, there were some people who signed up that were either unexpected or kind of fresh to signing up. People that were unexpected were Cubfan and Parker. They hadn't played in a little bit, but they are playing again for the first time in a long time. Both of them signed up saying, I'm cool with this, blah, 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 whatever, right? And then we worked with that. Joel signed up after playing last event. I think he mentioned that he was going to play Blockwars more, or I don't know how it's going to work, or how what he said on stream or whatnot. But Joel potentially could be someone who will sign up every time, or maybe every now and then, or maybe only once, who knows. But he signed up with certain conditions, and that's why we included him in the way that we included him. And then Joe and Shatter both signed up. They usually sign up, but they both signed up together. So that's why they were on the team as a duo. So that's how that works. I should also clarify, Cubfan and RecRep was not a duo. They just ended up on the same team because it made sense. So that's people who signed up and should be in for obvious reasons. Obviously, people who haven't played in a while should play if they signed up because obviously they express interest in playing again. We should give them a chance. Joel and Joe are examples of just high viewership players and popular players and easy to work with players that just make sense to be in the roster. If someone is popular and extremely hard to work with, we'll still try to put them in, but it'll be a little bit less frequent. But they are both people who are high viewership, very popular, beloved by the community, and also pretty easy to work with in terms of what I've seen thus far from signups, that it doesn't make sense to bench them ever, pretty much. So they will probably be in every event that they sign up for because they just allow for us to include them very easily. And then Shatter hadn't played yet this series, so he, alongside a Joe duo, making a little bit of a bonus chance to get in, but he was already going to get in probably. Also should have been in, and he is. People who signed up and were potential to be in, these are two examples, and I'll explain why. Stu had played in Blockwars 11, didn't play Blockwars 12. If possible, I would put him in Blockwars 13. Wasn't possible this time around, so maybe next time he could be in, but maybe not. Again, we have a lot of good players in Blockwars. It is very difficult to fit everyone in consistently, and the main problem is some of the best players in Blockwars are the most popular, and I don't want to bench those people frequently. For example, Feinberg, Purple, Kaman. I would like to include those people as much as I can. Additional problem is me, Misty, and Shane. We are people who are involved with Blockwars and also relatively popular, and also they're like some of my best friends. It's very difficult to bench them. It sucks. They'll probably have to get benched eventually, more than they do right now, but it's difficult. We'll see what I can make happen going forward. And then Purple signed up. He should have been in if possible. I just couldn't fit him in, so he's on the bench. Next up, Poundy signed up, unlikely in. The reason that I would say that Poundy was unlikely to get in this event is because usually Poundy is like an every now and then player in terms of getting in the roster, and Poundy just played 2 events in a row. So when possible, I would prioritize other players over Poundy, which happened for the most part. There was even other people that didn't get in that would have been in over Poundy. So that's why Poundy was unsigned up and unlikely to be in. And then finally, people that are not available. In Sneak's case, he confirmed it himself, and in Hannah and Rain's case, I messaged him because there were teams that I think they would have fit very nicely on, but they were both not available to play, so we had other things to figure out, which is totally fine, of course. So hopefully this gives you the full perspective on how it works. Finally, I will mention, I forgot this. There were some questions that I will try to answer from the comments. So let's see if I can let's see if I can spot the questions and answer them. Here we go. This is actually really helpful and explains a lot. Thank you, Wolfeei. I feel like help not copying. That's fine. What's the importance of the ranking, average ranking stat, as compared to average individual team placement and average individual team points? Because I feel like it can also affect. Hold on 1 second. The music is loud. Affect teams a lot, and the stat just sounds interesting in my opinion. So here's the balancing sheet. The ranking factor comes into play to kind of give a perspective on what's expected from players and how that reflects the teams. Because, as mentioned, it's like a tier list, right? You know, there's a chance some people are very likely to place top 10, but only recently. For example, like a Shadoon is someone who, in MCC as well, only recently started doing so much better, where statistically it may not reflect his ability to perform like that in like points and average placement, but it should be factored in as the ranking that he is able to get top 10 pretty comfortably. And I think another example is like Prince Zam. Zam statistically isn't the like highest placing player, but I know that recently he's gotten like top 10 pretty much twice, or at least close to top 10 twice, or like 3 times, sorry. So his ranking factor is slightly higher than his stats reflect. I think he is either a 3 or a 2 right now, when I think statistically he should be like a 4 or maybe a 3. I don't know. It's one higher than I think his stats say he should be. And there's other people where that applies as well. I think Joel's another one because he's only played twice, one of them being on a weak for fun team. So his stats reflect to him saying he should be a 4, when I think on the sheet he's a 3. Some people, you know, will be the other way around, where statistically they may look like they should be a 5, but they're actually a 6. I think, I don't actually know who is a good example of that. B Team C is another example. B Team C statistically should be like a 7, but I think he's a 5 or a 6, one of the two, I don't know. Something like that. So that's how that works. It's kind of a hint, or like it's just another guideline to work with for team balancing, to kind of showcase like, oh, this team may be a little bit strong. And what you'll notice here is Orange team is the only team to have a 4.8, which is the lowest ranking, obviously by not that much. But basically how this works, it's not the most consistent and most reliable stats, because I haven't updated this sheet super actively. I update it with new scores and new stats every single time an event happens, but I don't look into stats perfectly, and some stats are slightly outdated considering recent changes to the blockwars balancing, which this will be updated eventually. Because for example, I think Jimmy right now has a ranking of 8, which I think is why this team is a 4.8 right now. Jimmy probably would be a 7, and Moxwell could be like a 6. I think Moxwell might be a 7. Again, sheet's not entirely updated properly. This still factors in stats from before like blockwars 9 and stuff, when we started making things weaker. So not perfect, but that's why certain stats are the way they are. Kind of reflects on where I think people will place roughly as like a tier list. It'll be like, oh, S tier is like a 1. You should get top 10. Very good is like, you should get just shy of top 10, but like top 15, maybe top whatever, right? Etc, etc, etc. That's how that will work. Again, not perfect. I will go over this like in private and fix it, because it's not perfect like mentioned, but that's how that works. That's why it's there. I don't just look at that stat or the ranking, but it's like a guideline. Next up, there was how do you set average for newcomers, or does it probably similar? How do you set a point average to a newcomer when balancing teams? When mentioning that newcomers have a starting average placement of 40th. I don't know how that would apply to point averages. Guessing clearly isn't the most accurate thing, considering makes pop off in blocks 11 compared to your expected bottom 10, but I'm curious what the process normally is. So, on the sheets, if you look at data, I'll actually explain how this works as well. Data. This is data that is collected from scores, plays, team plays, all together. As you can see, you have a new 1, a new 2, a new 3, this follows along the ranking factor. A new one is someone that's new to the event and is an S tier. For example, if Silver Runs were to join the event, he would be a new one. So that's a guaranteed, like, or at least someone I'm going to balance first event as a top 5 player, because from what we've seen thus far, that is probably going to happen, assuming he plays, of course, right? New 2 is someone who will get like around like 10th-ish range, and then new 3 around 15th, etc., etc., etc. And I can scroll a little bit because I've actually done everything here. New 4, blah, blah, whatever. You'll see that there's more news. These need to be updated again because it's not entirely accurate to how things work now, but this is roughly accurate of how things work-ish. What you also notice here, this is not very relevant, is some names are cyan instead of yellow. Yellow is everybody who's played a normal event before or planned to play a normal event or whatever. Cyan is someone who's only played like rookies or chaos or something like that, right? So someone who's exclusive to just non-standard blockwars events thus far. Then if we go to scores, okay, random video cut. I just accidentally showed stats that I didn't block out yet, so I had to figure this out in post, which probably means that this video is now much more delayed than I intended. Thanks me for recording for 50 minutes and then messing up at the very end. Anyways, this is how the score sheet looks. I blocked out pretty much everything. I think Ashwag is a prime example of why things should be looked at, because if you look at this thing, they put Ashwag's score as 1754 and only used the average stats and blah, 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 whatever. If you look at this thing, his is almost 100 higher, because I increased his blockwars 1 stat because of the 15% increase. Then I took out blockwars 2 because it shouldn't be factored in, and then blockwars 11 is there, and that results in this average instead of this or instead of this average. So that's how that works. Yippee. Then if you go to place, 2 things I should show. Puffy I just showed because this will have a little red thing. The reason that is because Puffy hasn't played yet, and it doesn't work if you don't have any stats. That's why we use the new factor. Kimin is someone I will show because there's a lot of things that it reveals here. Some stats are taken out because they are like standout weak or standout strong performances that no longer reflect how things would work currently. And then in Cam's case, his stats are also adjusted by -2 because we all know Kimin is a lot better at blockwars now than he was before, which is why I specifically make him have a higher average placement just in order to make things a bit more fair. And if you look at team place, this is fine to show because this is just the average team, or every time that someone's played with their team performance, etc., blah, blah, whatever, right? So this is factored in because I want to give people a stronger team if they've had weaker teams before, and I'll give people weaker teams, if possible, if they've had stronger teams before. So that's how that works. Anyways, thank you all for watching. I hope this gives you enough insight. I'm so upset that I recorded for 50 minutes and then I messed up at the very end, but it is what it is. And hopefully all these little things give you insight on how the process works. I did not expect this to be an almost hour-long video, but it's team making, so of course I'm going to be yapping about it as much as I can. Anyways, thank you all for watching. I hope you had fun with this, and hopefully you've learned something. See you later. Goodbye.